now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here is Reverend Martin.
Good afternoon, my friends. How are you? Good afternoon, good evening, but never good night, and certainly never, ever goodbye. I hate goodbyes, don't you? I'm Pastor Nathaniel W Martin, pastor of New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in Los Angeles, California. And we have episodic podcast from KTYM Media, which we call It's Time. And principally what it is time for is economic equity, economic justice, and reparations. That would include reparations, and environmental and social justice issues as well. We take our marching orders from the scriptures, and we have two particular texts that we want to emphasize. One from Deuteronomy chapter 24, beginning at verse 14, which says, "Very sternly thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether they be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. At their day," that means when they get through working, whenever they get through doing whatever you got them doing, "thou shalt give them their hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for they are poor, and set their heart upon it, lest they cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be a sin unto thee." Notice right away, as we always say, that God is concerned about our interactions, our interrelationships between each other. And since in the Constitution of the United States, a corporation, at least in the understanding of the U.S. Supreme Court, is a person, now we have to extend this justice through companies, through corporations, whether it be multinational or whatever. No more whether it's just two people. No, you're dealing with multinational corporations. You got to be treated fairly. You buy a product, the product ain't no good. You can't get no refund. You can't get no satisfaction. They won't recognize. They won't honor the warranty. All of these things are a stench in the nostrils of God as well. That's oppression. And oppression is a political term. And when we start listing oppressions and oppressors, the list, my friend, will go on for hours. And if there is someone doing the oppressing, then there is also the object or the subject of that oppression. So you have those who are the oppressors, and then you have the rest of us who are the oppressed. And God is on the side of the oppressed, regardless of whatever your so-called nationality, country of origin, or so-called social position may be. God is always on the side of the oppressed. Remember, Jesus said, "Inasmuch as you have done this unto the least of these, my brothers or my sisters, you have done it unto me." So we need to be careful as we go through life. And for those of us who feel that and know rather that we have been wronged or done wrong, whether on the job, in our employment, or in any other sphere of the numerous spheres of social engagement, that you have a God on your side. If you are the oppressed, God is on your side. He's looking and he is booking. And in this first set of scriptures that we read, it was about pay. It was about economics. Oh, what trouble we have with economics. We want to get God out of our economics. But you cannot get God out of your economics, because that is the medium by which we have the ability to continue to function in this political system, in this capitalistic society. And we can't squirm out of that one. Whether it's the offering plate or whether it's the paycheck, God is deeply concerned with our economics and how we deal with our economics. Do we deal fairly and justly, or are we crooked and fraudulent? And these things are practices, rather, that one has to address oneself to ethically. Whether you take seriously the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. We all realize that there is a retribution. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. I believe what the scripture said, whatsoever man or whatsoever person, whatsoever company, whatsoever corporation, whatsoever board or organization soweth, that shall it also reap. There's going to always come a reckoning, my brothers and my sisters. Notice, if you please, I read that in the Old Testament. A lot of folk don't have time for the Old Testament. They all emphasize the New Testament. What does the New Testament say or bring to bear on our economics, on our finances, on our interpersonal relationships one with another? Glad you asked. One of the scriptures is in the book of James, the little book of James. And in the last chapter, James chapter 5, verse 4, it says, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth." Notice, the hire of the laborers. What is the hire? That is the pay. The hire of the laborers, which is of you kept back. In other words, you were supposed to have paid them on Monday. Here it is Sunday, and you still ain't paid them. God is observing, looking, witness to these injustices that we or experience. Not because you personally do the injustice or I personally do the injustice, but sometimes we are guilty, are we not, of failing to live up to our promises. And sometimes it's when the larceny enters in, and the envy and the greed and the resentment. I'm supposed to pay you $10,000. I can't see you with $10,000 of my money, so I'm holding it back. I won't give it all to you at one time. I give it to you in pieces. No, give me all of my money. I'm supposed to pay you all of your money, regardless. Because if you've done the service, or you have done the job, or whatever it may be, produced the goods that were needed or that were requested, and now I have the goods. Quite naturally, I'm supposed to be very willing to exchange, because we made we made an agreement. And in our country, that's where there's a huge chasm between what we say and what we do. But remind you, God is witness in all of these social contracts, whether it be a union or not. It has no bearing, or it is no never mind. God is observing, and God is displeased when we fail to live up to what we have promised, or to give what we have agreed to. I don't know why some of us are so cheap when it comes time to paying what we owe. We just hate to turn loose that money. Now, let me finish that scripture without any further commentary. "And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." The cries of them which have reaped. The cries of the people who have worked and who have labored and who have toiled and who have a just demand, have made a just demand and have a just claim upon the society, a just claim upon the company, the corporation, the business, for wages held back. Yeah, for benefits not bestowed, for paychecks that were short, for checks that bounced. You know, I don't know about you, but I've worked for some trucking companies and they give me a check, and it'd be a big check, and you get to the bank and it bounced. And when that check bounced, that means I'm in the hole because I've already written other checks dependent on this check to catch up my own bills. You know how it goes. You got the utility bill, you got the car note, the insurance bill, and all these things. And then the company you were depending on gives you a what? A bad check. And you're in a bad way, because when them checks start bouncing against that bank gonna look at you and they're gonna don you for every one of those checks with those penalties and those fees. And before you know it, the penalties and fees will break you. Use up all of the funds that you have in the bank, and that's even with overdraft protection. So you find yourself in the hole. And why are you in the hole? Because the people didn't honor their obligation to pay you your money in a timely fashion. Oh, how many of us have been victimized by such dealing, such skullduggery, such fraud? And don't think that you are alone. Now, my friends, I want you to look at the state of our nation, the state of our country. And now there's a great trial going on in the country against one Paul Manafort. And you mark that name. If that doesn't ring a bell, do a little Google search on him and you'll find out he goes back a long way in the history of politics in this nation. And believe me, when you start talking about money, you're going to really have to become a political scientist, whether you want to or not, because money and politics are seemingly synonymous. While we even have one of our own local politicians who is now the subject of some investigation for some ethical missteps in that he got his son a position at USC, and come to find out that the boy was unqualified for that position, and the professors and teachers have all rose up against him, and he's been fired. And come to find out that he got that job after there was a certain $100,000 given to that university for some reason by the father of the said supposed teacher, professor. And now there is a question of the ethics of the matter. And so it goes. So you always find out that there is more to the story than one sees with the smile. And so that is the story. That is really one of the great bête noirs, if you will, of politics. There's always something going on out of sight, some deal. Always some deal. There's always going to get away with the deal, and the deal always falls through. But to Mr. Paul Manafort, currently on trial in this country, and come to find out that he was, despite the protestation and the disclaimers by the Trump administration to the contrary, that he was very, very prominent and active and important to the election of Donald Trump. And we need to be aware of Mr. Manafort's activities, because as we're coming up on another election, we're coming to find out that there is a great deal of meddling, yes, meddling in the democratic process. It's no longer just Bull Connor and Jesse Helms and that ilk trying to keep black folks from voting. They're trying to undermine the entire voting process of the United States of America. Foreign entities, but they always have people on the ground in the country that are aiding and assisting and abetting. And this Paul Manafort has always been one of those type of operatives. If you go back and check his record from the time of the young Republican back there when they got Barry Goldwater the nomination for the Republican presidency, United States of America, and all through the development, the evolution rather, of the lobbying in Washington, D.C., they have taken lobbying to heights unknown. In 1960s, the lobbying was not nearly what it is at this time. And you're going to find out that these lobbyists are working on both sides. Paul Manafort had a lobbying consulting firm, which they call, let me get the name right. The name of the firm was Black, Manafort, and Stone. Mr. Black and Mr. Stone were both all friends of Mr. Manafort, and Manafort was the catalyst, you might say. He was the genius that kept it all together, and they devised a scheme where they would not just be limited to, say, election campaigning, but that they would also be doing what? Lobbying. And a lobbyist is one who goes to the various offices of the elected officials and persuades them to vote this way or that way on pending legislation. Not only do they help them in which way to vote, but we come to find out that these lobbyists are actually writing some of the pieces, or some of the bills that become legislation. So what does that have to do? What is that? Well, because of the fact of how it impacts me and how it impacts you. Because I can't go up in Washington and write no bill. I don't have no money to go pay no politician to switch his vote. But Paul Manafort and his ilk do. And believe me, when it comes to these politicians and money, they go the way of the highest bidder. And Manafort is a very colorful character in that regard. And his ties to the Russian oligarchs that they keep popping up now in his trial go back to the days when the Soviet Union was being phased out and when so-called democracy was being phased in. And these rich oligarchs seized control of the aluminum, whether by violence, seized control of the aluminum production. They seized control of many of the industries that make a country run. And Paul Manafort was always there, and he was on helping these oligarchs to hide this money in offshore accounts and helping them to depose or to overcome their competitors. And he has a very colorful history. And remember, there has never been a fair election in Russia. Putin came to power because of political corruption, because he had been the director, the leader of the KGB, which he still never gave up. And they knew where all the bodies were buried because they had buried them there themselves. And Putin engineered the election for where Boris Yeltsin, even Boris Yeltsin has said that Putin is going to become the leader of Russia. And nobody knew where this Putin came from, you see. But Paul Manafort was there with the Russian oligarchs at the beginning of Putin's elevation to leader of the Russian people. And how that ties into the United States of America, you say, well, just like America was active in elections influencing elections in other countries, don't you think that the Russians would find it to their favor, to their interest, to be very deeply involved in the elections in one of the most powerful countries on the face of the earth, namely their rival, the United States of America? Quite so. It's naive of us not to be aware of these things. And as the trial of Paul Manafort is going forward, I think we're going to have more eye-opening instances if we don't allow ourselves to be put back to sleep by the underreporting that we hear in our local or in our national, indeed our national news media. Remember, Mr. Trump continued to say there's no collusion, there's no crime. We never met with any Russians, and we come to find out that Jeff Sessions met with the Russian, and he's the Attorney General of the United States of America. Wow. And Donald Trump Jr. met with the Russian. That's come out now. And now what they're trying to avoid saying is that Donald Trump, the president, knew about these meetings and that he encouraged these meetings because they thought they were going to get some information that would be damaging to the Clinton campaign. Wow, how these webs come together. And so you and I, who are laboring and struggling here to be honest and get an honest day's pay for an honest day's work, look at these others on the contrary, who were just rolling in dough. Why? And then this Paul Manafort, come to find out, he had invested $18.9 million of a certain Russian oligarch's money. And this guy's name I have written down here. I don't see it right now. But here it is, Deripaska. Oligarch's name was Deripaska, and he had allowed Paul Manafort to take that's $18,900,000 of his money and invest it in some firm, some country, or to park it offshore in some account so that he could have that money, have use and access of that money. And it seems that for some reason Mr. Manafort absconded with that money, much as he did with Ferdinand Marcos' donation of $10 million to the Ronald Reagan campaign. That money never made it to the Reagan campaign because it would have been illegal in the first place. But then that didn't stop the Ferdinand Marcos from making the donation, and it didn't stop Paul Manafort from receiving the donation. Excuse me. And it certainly did not stop him from parking it in his own personal account offshore. Even his friends back up on supporting or speaking up for him on camera or in public for attribution because of the fact that they know he's capable of all of this type of skullduggery. And you go back and research that firm, that consulting firm, and that lobbying firm. You see, it appears that, for example, in the 88 election, that one firm was representing 3 of the Republican candidates that were running. For instance, Lee Atwater was representing George Bush. All right. The man named Mr. Paul Black, not Paul Black, his name was Black. Let's say he's a member of that firm. He was working for Bob Dole. See how that works? And then the third partner in that firm, Mr. Stone, was advising another of the campaign operatives who was running, whose name was Jack Kemp. And those guys have continued to gain more and more influence in the Republican establishment and indeed in Washington. They don't just stop with Republicans. They reach across the aisle, and they're not above doing some very dangerous and some very shady and I'm no doubt at certain points violent activities, threats, and the like. What was that? The book, that was a book written, How to Win Friends, and there was another book written called about winning through intimidation. Well, these guys know how to intimidate. They do that opposition research. And out of that opposition research, if you're going to run for politics, you better find out what they know about you before you throw your hat in the ring. Because they'll always hold something back on you like they did to the Godfather's pizza man, Kane, the black fellow. They let him go it on until he looked like he was starting to get a little traction, and then they pulled the covers off of him and talked about all of his promiscuity and killed his candidacy. You got to always know where the bodies are buried. That was the power of Paul Manafort and his ilk, that they were not above using dirty tricks and the like. And matter of fact, they specialized. As a matter of fact, he boasted he has no moral limits. And these people are now his ilk, not just Paul Manafort, but his ilk. That type of mentality now is in charge of the politics of the United States of America. And so what we're saying is, where that money and that politics are working together, then you have a huge possibility of corruption and greed taking over. Not because you, a poor person, are greedy or corrupt, but no, because those that are in charge of fashioning the choices that you will make are themselves corrupt. Remember, we've never chosen a politician to run in our lives. It's always who the establishment presents to us, and we're told this is the lesser of the lessers of the two evils, and that's what we do. We don't get a chance to go behind the scenes or be in the dark rooms or do the background work and check and make the presentation of a particular candidate. Say, well, this would be a better one because we don't have that kind of money. We're not in that position. We don't have that influence in Washington or in any legislative body. Am I right? And so stay awake, my friends. Don't go to sleep. And let us be diligent because there's all manner of machinations and political devices being exploited upon the people to undermine your vote. And really, I don't know if we've ever had an honest election in these United States of America. As we close out today, our slogan, if they don't want to pay you with all the millions of billions and trillions of dollars that they got, don't work for them. God bless you. We're talking to you again. Keep your eye on this trial. You're going to find out a lot of things. God is looking and God is booking. We're out. Thank you.